everyone. This is Outnumbered. I'm Emily Campagno, here with my co-hosts Kayleigh McEnany and Harris Faulkner. And also joining us today, Fox Business anchor and host of American Dream Home on Fox Business, Cheryl Casoni, and Fox News contributor and contributing writer for Forbes, Richard Fowler. Now we begin with new revelations in the Biden family's business dealings after one of Hunter's former allies sat down with the House Oversight Committee. Devon Archer finally made it to Capitol Hill yesterday, where he talked with lawmakers for over 4 hours about his experiences with Hunter Biden. Both men served on the board of the Ukrainian energy company Burisma. And during that time, Archer claimed Hunter was all about building his family's global reputation. What actually transpired is still unclear, but so far, here's what we know. Archer says Hunter repeatedly put his dad on speakerphone when he was out with clients. He witnessed that more than 20 times over the course of a decade. And the calls helped to sell the, quote, Biden brand to clients around the world. Now, some top Republicans are speaking out against President Biden. They say the evidence has started to pile up.
Do you think the President of the United States is compromised based on Archer's testimony?
I think so. I think so.
Well, every day this bribery scandal becomes more credible. I mean, let's look at what Devon Archer testified today. He said that not only was Joe Biden on the phone over 20 times with people, including the Burisma executives, talking about whatever, even though the president denied that he never spoke to any of these people.
And of course, we know. Yeah, the brand was totally Joe Biden, the guy with the power and the connections in D.C.
This is not about revenge politics. What we're hearing from what Devon Archer had stated, selling access, selling a brand. We're seeing Hunter Biden directly calling his father to, again, like you stated, sell that brand.
Sell that brand. And on the other side of the aisle, Democrats are downplaying the calls that Archer witnessed.
He did describe that there were approximately 20 occasions over the course of their nearly decade-long business relationship where, when one of them called the other, that Hunter Biden would ask his father to say hello to whomever he was at dinner. He said there were some times when it was friends and sometimes when it was potential business partners or business partners. But the witness was unequivocal and stated very clearly that they never discussed any business on that phone conversations. There were niceties and there was a hello and we talked about the weather or whatever it was, but it was never any business. How much longer are we going to go on this fishing expedition? There is no evidence connecting President Biden to anything related to Hunter Biden.
Kayleigh McEnany, but as the Wall Street Journal editorial board writes, well, it's highly unlikely that Hunter wanted to talk about the weather with his father. He knew what he was selling. And as they say, we'll see what else we learn as the House keeps looking.
Yeah, it was all hello, niceties, and the weather. Well, let's play this out. Hi, Harris. Nice to see you. It's sunny out. That took 3 seconds, not 20 phone calls for the duration of which we do not know. That is patently absurd. Goldman, as someone who is typically, good at spinning, that was a pretty bad spin. The weather, though, is a favorite of the Biden administration. You have Goldman saying it here. Remember, Karine Jean-Pierre blamed the wind for blowing Biden over on Air Force One staircase. Remember, she blamed heavy winds as the reason a border wall wouldn't work. And remember why he uses that middle staircase on Air Force One, because of extreme weather. So they love to blame the weather. You got to get a better scapegoat, guys. But what is amazing here is the liberal media. The New York Times saying it has long been known that Biden at times interacted with his son's business partners. Really, because you've spent the last year saying that that was not known, and in fact, that was a lie. New York Times goes on to say Republicans pointed to the interview as evidence that Biden had lied when he claimed he had no involvement in his son's business dealing. Fact check New York Times. He didn't claim he had no involvement. He told Peter Doocy in September of 2019, I have never spoken to my son. But leave it to the shameless left-wing media to cover for the president. You can't do it because the American people, they've been listening since 2020.
Harris, last hour you had Congressman Fallon on. What did you learn?
Well, one of the things I learned were just where we're not looking. And he and I agreed on this. We need leaders who will hold accountable those who are closest to them so they're not compromised and thereby the rest of us compromised. So the questions that really bubbled up for Congressman Fallon and myself were, Well, is this just an uncurious former vice president that he wouldn't ask his son after a call or previous to a call? Who was that on that line? And if it happened 20 times, maybe there was an opportunity for this president, then vice president, to have said, look, I need for you not to do that, but if you're going to, I need to know who's on the other line, because this could have a certain tinge, this could look a certain way, the wrong people on the other line. But instead, what Hunter told us in 2019 in ABC News was, well, my dad was just simply telling me he knew about the Ukrainian situation and him sitting on the board. He was telling me I better know what I'm doing. So already the story had migrated, even back to 2019. But now it's that total deniability that there was any knowledge of who might have been on the speakerphone, who Hunter was doing business with. We need leaders who are going to be more curious than that, if not only for their own CYA, but to cover the rest of us. National security is important. Who knows who was on those phone calls? Well, Devon Archer knew.
Richard, so much that has been teed up. Take your pick of what you want to say.
Respond to it all, please.
Sure. I mean, look, I think perspective here matters. And I think obviously none of us were in that hearing room, so we don't know everything that was said. But there was a couple things that stood out to me right away. Number one, it was 20 calls over 10 years, right? And I think that actually matters. So if you do some back of the envelope math, that's 2 calls every year for 10 years.
While vice president.
No, but some of the time he wasn't vice president. The vice president was the former vice president. He was a private citizen, and he called his son, and his son was at dinner. And to be honest with you,
that name is always powerful. That's how he used it to get into office.
But Harris, but it's also fair to say for every member of Congress and for every senator, for everybody who was a legacy admissions, they used their parents' names to get things, and it's not their parents' fault for what they do. I mean, i.e. Jared Kushner, who used his parents' name to get into Harvard University.
Right?
So my point here is hop on the phone.
Yeah,
with,
but in Jared Kushner's case, they gave Harvard $2.5 million for him to get there.
Talking about Harvard versus
You've got to consider the players.
I'm not denying the players here, but what the Republican House Committee is trying to prove is that the sitting president of the United States engaged in bribery with a foreign country. At this point in time, based on we're almost at a year of them investigating this, they keep saying there's smoke, but it could be condensation or it could be a smoke machine, but they don't seem to have fire.
Why did Obama officials reportedly warn the current vice president that what he was doing was shadowy?
Kayleigh, they warned the vice president. Kayleigh, sorry, they warned the vice president about his son's dealings. There was a Justice Department investigation that's still pending. That's not over.
Would you have done it if you were vice president and Obama officials warned you not to do it?
Yes, I would have
done it.
No, I wouldn't have done it. But let's be very clear. This is about his son, and his son, we also know, has a very checkered past. His son is currently under an investigation.
He didn't mention any of that. He didn't mention any of that in 2019 during that ABC News interview with Amy Robach.
So
he didn't mention any of that.
I want to get Cheryl in here, and let's sort of draw that out. Because I hear everything that you're saying, and I do think respectfully that what's different, though, is the players and also the stakes. So admission into Harvard because of a donation is different than potentially.
We can also talk about the relationship with the Saudis, but I think.
Can we talk about China?
Yeah, just to finish my sentence real quick, that's why FARA's on the table. So it's not about whether your name on the gymnasium is on the table. That's why the pending charges you mentioned could be violation of FARA, which is such a big deal.
The only point I was trying to make here is that kids use their parents' names all the time to get things. It doesn't mean that their parents are committing crimes.
Yeah, I never did, just to be clear, but okay.
Because my parents didn't have it.
My parents didn't help me do anything,
so
to be clear. Can I bring up China here for a second?
Yeah,
This is what really troubled me about what we heard from Archer yesterday. It's about this lunch that Vice President Biden, when he was vice president, had in Beijing with Jonathan Lee, the CEO of BHR. Okay, it's a private equity investment fund. Guess who owns them? The Bank of China. Guess who runs the Bank of China? The CCP. And the Communist Party of China in general, same thing. But what bothers me about this is that we're now finding out reportedly that Gina Raimondo is about to head over to Beijing. This is after Blinken. This is after Kerry and Yellen. They're all going hat in hand. Now it's going to be Raimondo to the Chinese. And we've been asking on Fox Business, definitely for the last couple of years, why has President Biden been so weak against China when they are stealing IP? They're buying land where they shouldn't be, near military bases. So those questions need to be answered. But I think that is a real That's what bothered me yesterday was that lunch in Beijing.
I want to get one more question to you, Richard, on this specific point that you had brought up about the president lying. So Bill McGurn writes this for the Wall Street Journal op-ed, which he essentially says the real danger for Mr. Biden in the 2024 debates is when the Republican candidate, when or if, asks him the obvious, which is, we've learned since 2020, everything you claimed about your son's business overseas, the last time you were on this debate stage, is untrue. Why should the American people believe anything you say now? If you were to advise him, how would you advise him? How does he respond to that?
Look, I think if you talk to most American people, they would say to you, everybody has a son or daughter that is potentially troubled. I think we're living in a world in which we've seen the real impact of opioids. For Hunter Biden, he is somebody who is also impacted by opioids. And I think that's how the president should answer this question. And I think
most Americans don't have children that get millions from the Chinese and the Ukrainians.
But let's be very clear. Just because your son engaged in bad behavior doesn't mean that you too are engaged in bad behavior. Over 10 years.
You have to have intestinal fortitude. As a leader, you have to have the intestinal fortitude to look at your child who you love and say, I need to know if you have exposed me.
Of course
you do. Because if you have, then the United States potentially is exposed.
Of course you do. And I think we're not privy to those private conversations.
Accountability and integrity.
Yeah. And the American people, I believe, as one of them, wants to learn more about Joe and less about Hunter. And that will be the real issue as we continue to learn more from the House Oversight Committee. Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Compagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kayleigh McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.